The wind carried a scent of decay, a sweet, cloying odor that clung to the air like a shroud. Pedro and Jaime, brothers bound by blood and toil, had become accustomed to the grim realities of their rural life. But nothing could have prepared them for the horror that unfolded after the distant cracks of gunfire echoed through the woods. The morning light revealed a scene that twisted their stomachs. A disemboweled corpse lay discarded like a broken doll amidst the trees. It was a gruesome tableau that seemed to mock the serenity of the wilderness. Drawn by an invisible thread of dread, they ventured deeper into the woods, the crunch of dry leaves under their boots a counterpoint to the frantic beating of their hearts. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon a dilapidated shack, its windows like vacant eyes staring into the abyss. Inside, they found Maria Elena, an elderly woman with eyes that held a desperate plea, and her two sons, Uriel and Eduardo. Uriel was the source of their terror. He was a vessel tainted by a demon, an unborn entity eager to tear its way into the world. They soon learned that the corpse in the woods was a cleaner, a hunter of the profane who had come to stop Uriel and his demonic passenger before it could spread its corruption. The authorities, with their usual bureaucratic indifference, deemed it not their problem. Even the landowner, Ruiz, offered no assistance other than to suggest a callous removal of the possessed boy from his land. Driven by a mixture of fear and misguided compassion, they loaded Uriel into the back of a truck and drove for hundreds of kilometers. They hoped that a great distance would quell the evil they were ferrying, but when they stopped they found him gone. They searched, but Uriel had vanished, leaving a festering dread that seeped into their very bones. Ruiz, with his usual bluster, declared the matter resolved and returned home, never suspecting the horror he had unleashed. The next morning, one of Ruiz's goats was found, its eyes vacant, its body contorted by the demonic presence that had taken root. Ruiz, a man used to wielding a shotgun to solve problems, ignored his wife Jaime's warnings that such violence would only spread the contagion. He shot the possessed animal, the sound reverberating like a death knell across the land. A possessed Jaime, eyes burning with hatred, then turned on Ruiz, tearing him apart before taking her own life in the same manner. The night was filled with a restless fear that was interrupted by a desperate knocking on their door. Eduardo stood there, his face gaunt and haunted by grief and terror. His mother had vanished after they had taken his brother, and he had found Ruiz and Jaime dead, their bodies mutilated in a macabre spectacle of demonic influence. Eduardo, unable to return to their shack alone, begged for shelter. Pedro, ever the pragmatist, agreed, allowing Eduardo to sleep in the shed, but only after Eduardo surrendered his pistol and swore to leave at dawn. As the first rays of sun began to paint the sky, Jaime and Pedro knew that they had to flee. The demonic influence had taken root in their land, and if they stayed, they were certain to become possessed. The family had to get out. Jaime retrieved their mother, Sarah, while Pedro went to gather his ex-wife, Sabrina, and his two children, Santino and Jair. Sabrina now lived with Leonardo, her new husband, an unfortunate man who was about to experience his own dark baptism into this world of pure horror. The family dog, which had the night before licked the clothes that Pedro wore when he found Uriel, was now infected and, in a fit of rabid violence, mauled Vicky, Leonardo and Sabrina's daughter, dragging her into the yard. Despite Pedro's cries, Leonardo shot the dog, but the damage had been done. Returning to the house, Pedro found Vicky seemingly unharmed. In an act of desperation and survival, Pedro stole a car, escaping with his two sons. Then, looking back, he saw Leonardo in his truck, a grotesque imitation of his old self, slamming his vehicle into Sabrina and Vicky, now standing and dancing with an eerie gleeful abandon. After Pedro reunited with Jaime and Sarah, they left town, the fear a constant companion in their escape. They met up with Myrta, an acquaintance of Jaime's, a former cleaner who had traded her old life for a life on the road. Myrta was wary and had noticed something wrong with Jair, who was beginning to show signs of possession. Jaime dismissed her concerns, ascribing Jair's odd behavior to his autism. But Myrta knew better. This was a spreading plague that had to be stopped. She warned them that they had to locate and destroy Uriel with the correct ritual to halt the demon's birth. The ritual, she explained, wasn't just about destruction but containment. The demonic force had to be extinguished or else it would consume everything. The demon was hungry and the family was beginning to fall apart. Sabrina, consumed by an unnatural desire, kidnapped Santino, and Jaime, his heart breaking, chased after her, leaving Sarah and Jer behind. He found her in a clearing, devouring Santino's brains in a scene so horrifying that it seemed like a hallucination. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred and been replaced by a hellish vision of his ex-sister-in-law's disfigured face smeared with blood and matter. In a blind fury, Jaime ran her down, pinning her to a tree, ending her grotesque existence. Meanwhile, Pedro and Myrta pressed on towards the center of the evil, looking for Uriel. Jaime's mother stayed behind with Jer, who suddenly began walking unassisted and speaking without impediment. Pedro and Myrta's grim search led them to an abandoned schoolhouse, a place of twisted innocence that now served as a haven for the damned. It was filled with possessed children, their eyes vacant, their faces pale, the very picture of corruption. These monstrous children had slain all the adults and were concealing Uriel's location. They found him hidden under the auditorium stage, a pulsating bundle of flesh and demonic intent. While Myrta started setting up the ritual, Pedro tried to get him out from under the stage. He thought an axe in a nearby office would be helpful, but in a moment of carelessness, the children lured him in and locked him in the office. While he struggled to get out, the children fell upon Myrta, dismantling her equipment and then tearing her apart. Emerging from the office, Pedro found Myrta dead, her equipment destroyed. He was too late. In a rage, he beat Uriel to death with his bare hands. In that moment, from the mangled corpse of Uriel, the demon emerged, a nude, blood-covered child. The infant, with eyes that spoke of ancient cruelty, taunted Pedro, marking him with streaks of blood. For reasons unknown, the demon decided to spare Pedro's life, leaving with the possessed children in tow. Pedro returned to Myrta's house, exhausted and filled with despair, where he found Jaime. The brothers, their faces etched with the horror they had witnessed, retrieved Jer and returned home. Inspecting the property, Jaime stumbled upon Eduardo, now completely possessed. Eduardo confessed to devouring the cleaner and his own mother 4 days prior. He spoke in cryptic tones of the feast to come. Eduardo ominously alluded that Sarah suffered a similar fate, and the brothers knew that she was lost to them. Inside the house, Pedro tried to comfort Jer with ice cream, but the boy choked and began to cough, expelling Sarah's hair and necklace from his throat. The reality of what had happened overwhelmed Pedro. He stumbled outside, falling to the ground, his cries a lament to the monstrous world that had taken so much and left him broken. The brothers, once bound by the simple rhythm of their lives, were now irrevocably altered by their journey through the heart of darkness, each of them marked with the stain of a demonic encounter. They had survived, but at what cost? Their land, once a source of comfort, had been tainted by the demonic, and they had no idea if they would ever be free from their experiences. They could only go on, each step filled with fear of what horrors they might encounter next.